For a long time, I believed that one day I would feel ready to begin, ready to speak, ready to move forward without hesitation following me closely behind. I imagined readiness as something that would arrive clearly, almost unmistakably. A moment when uncertainty faded, fear softened, and confidence settled in quietly, as if it had always been there. Until that moment arrived, I waited. Waiting felt responsible. It felt thoughtful. It felt like patience. I told myself that I wasn't rushing into things. I wasn't acting impulsively or carelessly. I was giving myself time to think, time to prepare, time to become the person I believed I needed to be before taking the next step. From the outside, it looked calm, measured, mature. And because it looked reasonable, I didn't question it. But time has a way of revealing patterns that don't announce themselves at first. Days passed, then weeks, sometimes much longer. Opportunities didn't disappear dramatically. They didn't collapse or demand attention. They simply faded, quietly, as if they had never been urgent enough to fight for. Each time I explained it the same way. It wasn't the right moment. I needed more clarity. I wasn't ready yet. And every explanation sounded convincing. I believed readiness was something you reached by waiting long enough, that eventually uncertainty would resolve itself, that fear would ease on its own if I gave it enough time. But readiness never came. Instead, hesitation became familiar. It settled in so gently that I didn't notice when it became part of how I lived. I learned how to pause naturally, how to delay without discomfort, how to stay still without feeling stuck. Waiting became comfortable, and comfort can be dangerous when it disguises itself as wisdom. I began to notice that I wasn't moving forward in the areas that mattered most to me. Not because I lacked ability, not because I didn't care, but because I was trying to remove uncertainty before allowing myself to act. That realization didn't arrive loudly. It surfaced slowly, almost reluctantly. I noticed how often I postponed things I cared about, conversations I wanted to have, decisions I knew were approaching, changes I sensed were necessary. I delayed them all, telling myself that when I felt more prepared, I would move. Preparation became a moving target. There was always something more to consider, another angle to think through, another reason to wait just a little longer. And because the reasons sounded logical, I trusted them. But beneath that logic, something else was happening. I was trying to protect myself from vulnerability. Beginning without readiness meant accepting the possibility of getting it wrong, of being seen before I felt complete, of stepping forward without the guarantee that I would feel confident or capable the entire time. That felt unsafe, so I waited. I told myself that stillness was a virtue, that patience was proof of maturity, that holding back meant I was being careful, thoughtful, disciplined. But over time, stillness stopped feeling intentional. It began to feel heavy. I wasn't resting. I wasn't reflecting deeply. I was suspending myself between intention and action, convinced that clarity would arrive if I remained there long enough. It didn't. What surprised me most was how convincing waiting can be when it's wrapped in good intentions. I wasn't avoiding life because I didn't want it. I was avoiding it because I wanted to do it right. And in trying to do it right, I wasn't doing it at all. I started looking back on my own history, not with judgment, but with curiosity. The moments that shaped me the most. Had I felt ready then? The conversations that changed everything? I entered them unsure. The decisions that altered my direction. I made them while doubting myself. The steps that led me somewhere meaningful. I took them without certainty. Readiness hadn't come first. Experience had. That realization was unsettling. It suggested that the thing I was waiting for had never been a prerequisite, that the clarity I wanted might not arrive before movement, but because of it. Still, letting go of readiness felt difficult, because readiness had become a kind of promise, a belief that if I waited long enough, I could begin without fear, without mistakes, without discomfort. But fear doesn't leave before action. It softens afterward. Waiting had given me the illusion of control. It allowed me to believe I was being intentional, when in reality, I was postponing exposure to uncertainty. And uncertainty is where growth lives. I began to see how often waiting protected me from being seen while unfinished, from speaking before my thoughts felt polished, from starting before I felt confident in the outcome. I wanted certainty before movement, But life doesn't offer certainty in advance. It teaches through participation, through trial, through presence. Readiness, I realized, had become a false finish line, one that kept moving further away the closer I thought I was getting. And the longer I waited, the easier it became to stay there. Not because waiting was right, but because it was familiar. I didn't need to be ready, but I hadn't learned that yet. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no moment where fear disappeared or confidence suddenly took its place. Nothing resolved itself cleanly. I didn't wake up one day feeling ready in the way I had imagined for so long. What changed was quieter than that. I grew tired of waiting for a feeling that never arrived. Not tired in a dramatic sense, not frustrated or angry, just gently worn down by the repetition of postponement. By the realization that I had been standing in the same place for a long time, hoping something internal would change before anything external did. I noticed how often I asked myself the same question. Am I ready? I asked it before conversations, before decisions, before beginnings that mattered to me. And almost every time the answer was the same, not yet. But one day, without planning to, I noticed something else. The question itself was the problem. Readiness had become a condition I placed on myself, a requirement I believed I needed to meet before being allowed to begin. And because the condition was vague and undefined, it could never truly be satisfied. There was always more clarity to wait for, more confidence to develop, more assurance to gather. So instead of asking when I would be ready, I began asking a different question, not intentionally, not as a strategy. It simply surfaced on its own. What would happen if I moved anyway? That question didn't feel bold. It didn't feel inspiring. It didn't promise safety or success. It felt neutral, almost ordinary. And because it felt ordinary, it felt honest. I didn't suddenly start taking large risks or making dramatic changes. I didn't push myself into action. I didn't force momentum. I allowed myself to take small steps while still unsure. That was unfamiliar. I had always believed that movement required confidence, that action needed certainty to be legitimate. But now I was moving with questions still present, with doubt still nearby. And the world didn't collapse. Nothing terrible happened. I made mistakes, but they weren't catastrophic. I felt awkward at times, but it passed. I didn't perform perfectly, but perfection wasn't required to continue. What surprised me was how quickly my relationship with hesitation began to change. Before, hesitation felt like a warning, a sign to stop, proof that I wasn't prepared enough. Now, it felt more like information. It showed me where I cared, where I was stretching, where something mattered enough to feel uncertain about. Hesitation no longer meant I was failing. It meant I was learning. I began to notice how confidence formed, not before action, but alongside it, not as a prerequisite, but as a byproduct. Each small step made the next one feel slightly less intimidating, not because fear disappeared, but because familiarity grew. Confidence wasn't something I needed to possess in advance. It was something that developed quietly through participation. I looked again at the people I admired most, not the loudest ones, not the most certain ones, but the ones who moved steadily without drama, the ones who seemed grounded rather than fearless. They weren't waiting to feel complete. They were willing to begin incomplete. They didn't eliminate uncertainty before acting. They allowed it to accompany them, trusting that clarity would form through experience rather than anticipation. That realization reframed everything. Readiness wasn't missing from my life. It had never been required. What I needed wasn't certainty, it was permission. And I had been waiting for that permission to come from a feeling that didn't exist. Once I stopped waiting, something subtle happened. I became more patient with myself. I stopped measuring my worth by how confident I felt. I stopped interpreting doubt as a flaw that needed correction. I allowed myself to be in process rather than postponing life until I felt finished. Beginning no longer felt like exposure. It felt like participation. And participation changed how I listened, how I learned, how I adjusted. I paid closer attention to what felt aligned and what didn't. I noticed when something drained me and when something quietly sustained me. Clarity didn't arrive as a sudden answer. It arrived as a gradual understanding of what fit and what didn't. I didn't rush to label decisions as right or wrong. I allowed them to unfold, to teach me something over time. There was a steadiness in that approach that I hadn't known before. I wasn't waiting anymore, but I wasn't forcing either. I was moving gently forward without demanding guarantees. Looking back, I can see how much energy I spent trying to eliminate uncertainty before living. How many moments I delayed because I believed assurance had to come first. But assurance is shaped by experience, not the other way around. You don't become ready and then begin. You begin, and readiness forms around what you learn, slowly, quietly, without announcement. Now, when I feel that familiar pause, the one that whispers, "Wait until you are ready," I listen more carefully, not to obey it, not to silence it, just to recognize it. And then I ask myself whether waiting is serving me or whether it's simply familiar. Sometimes beginning doesn't require bravery. It requires honesty. An honesty that admits you may not know yet, that you may not feel confident, that you may still have questions, and that it's okay. Because life doesn't respond to readiness. It responds to willingness. And the moment I realized I didn't need to be ready was the moment I finally allowed myself to begin.